Why did a crucial missile system disappear from Ukraine's deep strike arsenal, only to reappear in a high-stakes attack deep inside Russia, signaling not just a policy reversal, but an unavoidable strategic necessity? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're analyzing the strategic razor's edge that defined the conflict in Ukraine, and we're focusing on one weapon, the Army Tactical Missile System, or ATACMS. For months, this powerful weapon was held back.
Restricted by Washington.
Yeah, exactly. Then, almost quietly, the policy flipped. Our mission today is to unpack how the U.S. executive branch really acts as the ultimate gatekeeper.
It's not just controlling the hardware, is it? It's about the very calculus of the war.
That's it. It dictates when, and maybe more importantly, where Ukraine can actually play offense.
And that control isn't just theoretical. I mean, it's kinetic. We saw the immediate consequences of this policy shift very, very recently.
You're talking about the November 19th strike.
Yes, you need to remember that date, November 19th, 2025. Russia itself confirmed that military facilities in Voronezh, and that's deep inside their territory, were targeted by an ATACMS strike.
And Ukraine claimed that strike. That confirmation, regardless of the final damage assessments, that's the news hook that really underscores the shift we're diving into today.
It is.
For much of the last year, the U.S. had this severe limitation in place. No use of U.S.-supplied long-range weapons inside Russia. This strike says that gate is officially wide open.
It's monumental, really. The policy has moved from, let's say, deep restriction to what you could call decisive enablement.
Yeah.
And we're already hearing from Kyiv.
Right, the general staff has been pretty clear.
They've stressed that this use of deep strike weapons, now powered by U.S. authorization and, crucially, intelligence, will absolutely continue. So this discussion isn't just about what aid is provided. It's about the political permission structure that allows that aid to actually be effective on the battlefield.
Okay, so let's unpack this policy tightrope, because the U.S. administration is, undeniably the core influence on Ukraine's long-range strategy. And we've seen these two wildly distinct phases.
Yeah.
First, there was that restriction period. It started around late spring, where deep strikes using U.S. weaponry like ATACMS were, severely limited.
And that wasn't an accident. The reports we've seen indicate that the initial thinking behind this restriction was tied to an effort by the administration to encourage Vladimir Putin to engage in peace talks.
So the idea was, if we limit strikes on Russian soil, we signal de-escalation, and maybe that brings Russia to the table.
That's the hope.
But the restriction wasn't enforced by just, holding back the missiles. It was enforced through bureaucracy. They used this sophisticated review mechanism. Can you explain what that actually was? Because it affected more than just ATACMS.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where the real high-stakes political leverage comes in. This was a high-level Defense Department approval procedure. We're talking sign-off from the U.S. Defense Secretary.
For every strike.
For the use of any long-range weapon that relied on U.S. intelligence. That's the crucial detail here. It didn't just cover ATACMS, it also applied to allied systems, like the British Storm Shadow missile.
So wait, even if the UK supplied the physical weapon, the U.S. was supplying the classified targeting data that you need for those deep strikes to actually hit something valuable.
Exactly. The intelligence is the indispensable ingredient. So if the U.S. decides to withhold that targeting data for political reasons, say, to prevent a strike inside Russia, then those allied missiles, even with all their range, are effectively blind.
Or they're stuck hitting lower value targets.
Precisely. And we know for a fact that Ukraine was denied ATACMS use on Russian territory at least once under this formal review mechanism.
The sources show this really crucial, almost painful contrast in U.S. thinking during that period. Initially, the sentiment was just crystal clear.
Right. Disagreeing very vehemently, I think was the quote.
Yeah, with sending missiles hundreds of miles into Russia, they just saw it as a massive escalation.
But that caution, it came with a very steep strategic cost. And the realization that forced the policy to shift was, it was unavoidable.
Which was what?
That it is very hard, if not impossible, to win a war without attacking an invader's country. When you prevent the defender from striking the enemy's logistics, their industrial base, you are literally tying one hand behind their back.
You're preventing them from truly playing offense.
You are.
And this is where it gets really interesting, the catalyst for the change. That November 2024 authorization, it followed a major external shock.
The North Korean troops.
The confirmed entry of North Korean troops into the conflict.
And that event just redefined the whole concept of escalation for Washington. When a major new state actor physically enters the war to prop up Russia, the policy calculus, it just shifts instantly.
Because continuing the restrictive approach at that point meant risking what? A Ukrainian collapse?
It certainly raised the stakes. You're facing increased enemy manpower, increased material. The old policy of de-escalation by limitation, it was just dropped for a policy of military effectiveness. And this authorization for deep strikes and the intelligence that makes them viable, that's the proof.
So let's pivot from those high-stakes policy decisions to the capability itself. What exactly is the ATACMS missile that drove all these debates? Why is it so indispensable?
Okay, so the ATACMS is a long-range, precision strike, surface-to-surface missile. I want you to think of it as the ultimate instrument for hitting time-sensitive, high-value targets.
Like command posts, air defense batteries.
Exactly, or deep logistics hubs. And it can do it in any weather. It's a highly capable, very accurate piece of hardware.
Let's talk specs for a second. What defines its lethality?
Well, its range is significant. You're looking at over 300 kilometers. That's nearly 190 miles, depending on the variant. And crucially, it uses inertial navigation paired with a GPS. That combination gives it the precision you need.
To hit a specific building far behind the lines
Precisamente.
and the payload. That's often the most contentious part of this discussion.
It's versatile. It can carry a unitary warhead, which is designed for focused, powerful strikes. But that warhead is often set up using what's called a height of burst.
Okay, what does that mean?
It means the missile detonates slightly above the ground. The idea is to maximize the shrapnel and blast coverage across a really wide area. Think of it like a massive aerial shotgun.
Yeah.
Very effective against dispersed targets.
And the other option is cluster warheads.
Right, which are packed with hundreds of smaller submunitions. They can blanket even larger areas with explosions and shrapnel. Very effective against, say, troop staging areas or convoys.
We also have to acknowledge the scale of this system, which ties directly back to our own economic stability here at home. This isn't just about military impact overseas. It's a huge investment in the U.S. industrial base.
That's an absolutely critical and I think often overlooked dimension. This policy shift, it validates the massive industrial ecosystem that's required to produce these systems.
It's not just one big factory somewhere.
Not at all. ATACMS production relies on 134 suppliers, and they're spread across 29 states. 65 of those are designated as small businesses.
And we're talking about a serious economic engine. A fiscal year 2020 contract for ATACMS production, it's ordered $426 million. Over 400 rounds were under contract.
And that money is pouring directly into domestic manufacturing. It's supporting jobs and high-tech readiness in nearly 30 states.
So when the policy gatekeeper in Washington finally says, yes, you can use these deep strike systems effectively, it's not just impacting the battlefield.
No, it also validates the taxpayer investment in this huge distributed industrial base. You just can't afford to let $400 million investments sit idle when they are strategically required. The shift proves that the necessity of military effectiveness, it just overwhelmed the political caution.
Let's connect that political shift in the hardware back to the battlefield then. Because this reversal wasn't just political. It was driven by an undeniable military reality on the ground. The conflict is defined by what the sources are calling a constant adaptation spiral.
And that spiral is essentially a continuous, high-speed tactical game of rock, paper, scissors. You invent a new way to strike the enemy, but the enemy adapts. They develop a countermeasure a week, maybe 2 weeks later.
So you're constantly in this race.
You're constantly trying to kill the enemy's new technology before they can adapt and kill yours.
And the hard truth is that Russia has recently gained a, let's call it a marginal lead in that tactical adaptation battle, which is what makes these deep strikes so essential.
They're adapting in other ways, too. Strategically, Russia is leveraging its vast geography to shift manufacturing capacity out of Ukrainian strike range.
So if Ukraine can't hit deep targets, Russia just moves the factory further east.
Exactly, out of the existing missile envelope. Plus, Russia has shown some leads in developing and using stealthier, high-definition, fiber-optic-controlled drones. This really complicates the battlefield. It demands that Ukraine be able to disrupt the source, the production, the command and control far from the front lines.
Without that deep strike capability, they're just playing defense forever.
In perpetuity.
Which brings us back to what might be the core insight we have to emphasize here. The true gatekeeper is the intelligence, not just the missile hardware.
That's the real challenge.
Successfully executing these deep strikes requires, and I'm quoting, an extraordinarily complex adaptive program, just to constantly analyze and update the view of the dense Russian air defense system.
And penetrating Russia's multi-layered air defense is incredibly difficult. You need to find pinpoint weaknesses. So by choosing to provide the intelligence for these deeper strikes, the U.S. is risking sharing some of its most protected military secrets.
The data needed for successful penetration.
Yes. But they're doing it because the strategic threat demands it. This intelligence is the difference between a successful strike and a missile getting shot down.
And what's fascinating is that this intelligence exchange provides a dual benefit. Ukraine obviously benefits massively from the targeting data.
Of course.
But the U.S. and its allies, they also receive invaluable real-time data on how their strike planning doctrine performs against a dense, modern Russian air defense system.
It's a testing ground. It directly benefits the evolution of Western strike planning doctrine. When we enable Ukraine to use ATACMS against deep Russian targets, we are learning crucial lessons about how to counter advanced systems.
So this capability is absolutely dependent on clear U.S. policy authorization. And, most importantly, that high-value intelligence that makes these complex strikes possible.
It is.
So the core takeaway from this deep dive seems pretty clear. U.S. policy shifts on ATACMS demonstrate the profound control Washington holds over the strategic outcome in Ukraine. By restricting its use, the U.S. forced Ukraine onto defense.
And by enabling it following that strategic shock of new forces entering the war.
The U.S. is allowing Ukraine to finally play offense against a rapidly adapting enemy. The shift from a policy focused on sort of soft negotiation to one prioritizing military effectiveness was, in the end, a necessary step driven by battlefield necessity.
And this continuous, rapid back and forth between attack innovation and defensive countermeasures, I think that defines the future of conflict. Look, we saw the dominance achieved by simple drones in the early years of this war, 2022, 2023. We saw the strategic impact that had.
A complete game changer at the time.
It was. But counter-drone technologies are improving just as rapidly. And that raises the strong possibility that drones and counter-drone systems will achieve a kind of parity in future conflicts. So if the battlefield skies become heavily contested again, what does that parity mean for how the world trains and equips its conventional ground armies for tomorrow? That's the strategic challenge you have to consider when looking ahead.